Yeah, I would say like 75% of the people that I've had on asked if that's okay, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, you can cuss if you want to. It doesn't matter.
You
Um,
can cuss if you want. That's
yeah,
such a Midwestern word.
it's such a what?
Like a Midwestern word. You don't say cuss
Cuss,
on the East
curse,
Coast.
cuss, curse.
Yes.
I don't know. Whatever. Um, Welcome everyone back to the Thrive by Nutrition podcast. I have a very, very special guest on the podcast this week. Allie, do you want people to call you Allie or Allison?
I prefer Allie.
Allie Black. Um, she is an RD2B. She actually has already finished her internship. She is just waiting to take the exam right now. But she has a wealth of knowledge, and we actually went to graduate school together at Ohio University. We were really good friends there, and I'm so glad we were able to kind of sit down because we were kind of talking before we pressed record that we hadn't seen each other since um, my wedding about a year ago. So
Yeah, super crazy.
yeah,
Time flies like that.
I know. So Allie, tell the audience a little about yourself first.
All right. So I am originally from New Jersey. Just moved to Columbus after finishing my dietetic internship. And my whole path to get to this point has been very non-traditional. I graduated from the University of Delaware in 2015. I worked as a weight loss coach for about a year and a half before I was more or less recruited to go out to Ohio University for grad school, which is, like Joey said, where I met him. We were actually GAs together in the food science lab for a little while. Um, and then I sort of transitioned into their MSDI program, finished my hours, and now I'm out here looking for a job and just kind of studying. That's it for right now.
Yeah,
Got a little dog, and it's kind of kind of become my life.
yeah. Yeah, you've had a lot of changes, I feel like, recently, just like moving and
Yeah,
finally finishing the internship and everything. So you're in this like, kind of like weird, like floating transition stage, I feel like,
yeah.
with everything. Um,
My really good friend Andrew back at home called me a nomad while I was home. I've moved 5 times in the last 3 years that I've been out here, and
yeah,
before that, I moved every year that I was in undergrad. So I feel like I'm always kind of on the move. I'm never really in one place for very long anyway.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it makes things exciting, I guess. Always moving around, new scenery. Um, but yeah, we were GAs together, and that was a lot of fun doing the whole food science lab. Hopefully, we didn't mess up too many of those labs.
The kitchen's still like up and running, so it's fine. We couldn't
Yeah,
have been that bad. Actually, someone did set a fire in it the one year. Do you remember that? I think it
yeah,
was
that
just
was Dan and I. Well, it wasn't a fire, but the
no,
fire.
it happened in our lab.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember that. One of the rags caught on fire or something.
Yeah,
I think it was the cheese lab, maybe. I
it might
can't
have.
remember, but that's beside the point. So,
Yeah,
um, this is honestly like for the people listening, this is actually kind of like really awkward for us because we're like almost being too professional compared to like what we normally are since we had been such good friends for a few years. But um, so I wanted to ask you like just really briefly like what got you into nutrition? Like why did you even want to get into nutrition in the first place? Like tell the audience a little bit about your journey there.
so I was in high school when I started really getting into nutrition. My mom has some health issues, and my dad's a diabetic, and they've both kind of struggled with their weight. And I don't know like how exactly I started to get into healthy eating. Especially as a high schooler, I'm not doing my own food shopping and stuff like that. But seeing them and seeing or understanding that nutrition plays a really important part in the issues that they were dealing with or are dealing with, um, made me a little more motivated to improve my nutrition. And I think as I started to do that, I started to feel changes in myself, and I started to feel really great, and I started working out. I had a friend who had a gym membership at the Y, so I got a gym membership at the Y and I started working out and all of these things, even though, you know, I was just typically healthy, like I was a normal body weight. I ate healthy to be, you know, healthy to begin with. Just making these small changes made me feel that much better, and that is what really hooked my interest. And it's funny because I wasn't really sure what you could do with nutrition. So I went in as your, you know, typical undecided undergrad into college and took a nutrition course to see what it was like. And I was like, I really, really like this, but I don't know where I'm going to go or where this is going to take me. So let me explore a couple other gen ed classes and see what I like. And I ended up actually declaring a Bachelor of Science in Psychology first. And then I switched it. I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't think this is where I want to be. I want to do more with like fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle type stuff, whatever that might mean. So I think in the beginning, you don't really have a great idea about where this field starts to take you. It's not necessarily rooted in lifestyle coaching. It's more rooted in medical nutrition therapy and clinical nutrition, at least the way that I've gone through it. So I knew that I liked it and I went with it.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and that's one of the ways I feel like we kind of related to each other when we first met, was that like we both kind of came from unhealthy families or families that didn't have the best eating habits, and that kind of like we kind of went the other route where we wanted to try to make those changes and have a different result for ourselves. So it's super interesting kind of hearing that you did psychology at first too, because I mean I have my bachelor's in psychology, so I did psychology too first, and then I went nutrition too, but just a little later than you did.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little later, maybe like 4 years later, but we got there eventually. So
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same spot pretty much now.
yeah. So today we really wanted to talk about different factors influencing obesity in the US. I do that a lot. If you haven't like listened to my podcast, I trip up on my words a lot. But
I do too, which makes me feel so much better.
yeah, we end up recovering, so it's okay. But we really want to talk about factors influencing obesity in the United States, because obesity is something that just the rates, the prevalence just keep increasing year to year. Um, as of like 2017 or 2018, the obesity rate was up to, or prevalence was up to 42%, which I know like 5 to 10 years ago, it was around like 1 in 3 people. So around like 33%. So it's getting close to about half of everybody is obese. And I want to kind of say this because I know there are probably some people who are going to hear this and think, well, you know, BMI isn't that accurate, especially for people who work out a lot. Yes, that's absolutely true. If you have a lot of muscle mass on you, then you are, you know, you have a good chance of being at least overweight and maybe even in the obese category, but still being perfectly healthy. But the average American is not that physically active and they don't have that much muscle mass. So them kind of being in the obese category usually indicates that they do have excess adipose tissue, especially in the abdominal region. And then especially when we get into kind of like the different classes of obesity, like 1, 2, and get into the higher BMI ranges, like a 40 and above or more. So
you have to think too that a lot of this information comes from these scientific studies where the participants are being screened very rigorously. So if they're, you know, a participant comes in and they do classify like obese, but they have a body composition like you, because I think your BMI classifies you as obese,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You're probably not going to be included in that study with that group of participants where we're looking for a body composition that is, you know, less muscle mass and more body fat, because we're not looking at that. There's going to be completely different outcomes if the participant population was going to have a composition like you. So a lot of this information really is geared towards, individuals with, that kind of body composition, for the purpose of, finding, the effects of whatever they're looking for.
Yeah. I think it's important to emphasize, like, I know a lot of people listening to this are probably or might be like more into fitness and working out, 4 to 5 times at least per week. But the average American doesn't do that. The average American, usually, like, they're pretty sedentary, and the BMI, like I said, just more so reflects the amount of body fat that they usually have on them. When you get to like extreme levels, like if you're like just in the overweight category, like barely, then you might not have anything to stress about, especially if you're active. But if you're getting to the BMI levels of like 50 and above or more, then I mean, I don't know anyone who has a lot of muscle mass on them that has a BMI of 50 that's healthy. Like, I don't think you can get to a BMI of 50 from muscle mass unless you're taking a huge amount of steroids, and then that's another conversation of it probably not being healthy either. So we want to talk about this because obesity is related to a lot of chronic conditions: heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancers. So I think it's important to kind of think about all of the different factors that contribute to obesity, because there's a stigma around obesity, where people think that just because you're obese or you might have excess body fat, that you're lazy, or it means you don't exercise, or it means you're just too lazy to eat healthy food. And I think that's a huge misconception, because laziness is just like one little piece of the puzzle. Like, did you have anything to kind of comment on there? It looked like you wanted to say something.
I feel like my heart's like beating real fast because I can feel myself like getting really excited about this topic, which is like super nerdy. But I feel like I typically see people that kind of look at obesity like, okay, this person obviously eats too much and doesn't work out. And then we kind of go down, it's like, okay, they don't eat too much. They are, kind of active, but maybe they have some kind of disease or disorder that is making them or keeping them at this larger weight. And then it's like, okay, maybe that's kind of true, but it's not related to their weight. But now they're taking, a medication, and that might be affecting their weight. And we people tend to go through all of these variables, um, almost in an excusatory manner, before they look at some of these bigger picture variables, I guess is what I want to call them. Like, people aren't typically thinking of education and environment, whether it's geographical or it's social. We go through a lot of other things first before anybody even considers that. And genetics is another one. And that's why I'm really excited about this topic, because I like to talk about those things that nobody thinks of.
Yeah. And another thing too is that I think, like we acknowledged in the beginning of this podcast, that high levels of obesity or very high BMIs, like, they generally are associated with the negative health conditions. And I think there's kind of like two sides of the argument, to where there are people who want to just say that obesity is not related to these conditions, and they want to completely destigmatize obesity, which I think we definitely should. It should not be stigmatized. And then there are other people who say, like, no, you're only obese because you're lazy, and give this kind of negative view against obesity. And I think, like, we can acknowledge that there are health conditions that are associated with obesity that are negative, like heart disease and things like that. But at the same time, like, we can acknowledge that while still saying that they shouldn't be stigmatized, and it doesn't mean that you're lazy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I feel like whenever we talk, we're always discussing kind of the two extremes on either end, because that's kind of where people fall into. That's where a lot of people's opinions fall into, like, categorically about almost anything. And it's really important to look at that middle ground and really discuss about the important like variables and changes that can occur in those middle ground individuals, because it's not just, oh, you're lazy, or oh, it's genetic, or whatever. This is very multifactorial.
Yeah, for sure. And like we can acknowledge that it's a problem while at the same time not blaming the individual for the problem. Um,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
so one kind of big contributor to obesity that some people don't think about is kind of like financial status, or how much money somebody makes, their salary. That can play a huge role in what kind of food choices they can make. Um,
Mhm.
like if they're able to cook or buy healthier food, if they are able to have access to certain things. Like, what do you kind of think about that?
I think, yes, it's obviously a very important factor. And I think maybe where we should start is kind of education. I feel like education is, yes, going to affect our literacy, which affects our health literacy. It's going to affect the type of job that we can have. It'll, I guess, maybe even before education, it's geographical environment, because that'll affect the way that you're educated, which then affects all of these other factors. And it, we look at somewhere like Athens, Ohio, where you're in the middle of a food desert. People are driving, I don't know, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half in some cases to get to the grocery store or to get to the doctor, because it's very literally the closest one to them. Um, that, will come into play too. Obviously, you need money to buy food, but you need money to pay for transportation. Like, if you don't have money and that is the environment that you're living in, who's going to pay for an hour and a half long Uber to go grocery shopping if you can't afford a car? You can't afford the gas, the car insurance, the actual car itself. So I feel like, again, there's just levels to everything that we're going to talk about, and they're all so intertwined. Also, if you have lower education, like I said, the type of job that you're going to have is going to be different. So you might, I don't know, be an hourly wage worker, and literally have to live paycheck to paycheck to get your food. I had a really interesting conversation with my dad over the holidays. It was kind of cute because it really showed how clueless, I guess, he was. It's like when you tell a little kid something that they didn't really understand, or they didn't think of before, and they're like, oh my god, really?
Yeah,
That's so cool, I didn't know. Or they get like that because they're really just shocked. And I was trying to explain to my dad that the whole Athens geographical financial thing down there, because it's very different. Athens is very different than where I grew up. And I was explaining, in between making the 45-minute hour drive to the grocery store, you run out of things. So you have people that are food shopping now at gas stations and at Walgreens and at CVS. And I try and buy a balanced meal at CVS or Walgreens or at the grocery store on a budget. It is so difficult. All of those foods, the prices are jacked up. They hardly have any of the healthful foods that people feel maybe a little forced because of diet culture, and social media, and just this like healthy stigma that people have to buy them. It's really, really, really incredible. um, and just it puts such a strain on people. It's
yeah,
so hard. It's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Like, what comes first? I know I bounced around a lot. I have a
yeah. I don't think people realize just how much of an impact like your financial status can make as far as choosing healthier foods, because of some of those variables that you mentioned. Like if you live in a geographical area where the next grocery store is farther away, that's more money that you have to spend on gas, more wear and tear on your car going to get groceries, and then just more time. Like if you're not making that much money, you probably are going to be trying to work more hours. So maybe you can't afford to go to the grocery store as often. So then when you go to the grocery store, you have to buy a lot of non-perishable, non-fresh foods. And when you're buying a lot of non-fresh foods, maybe you can't get fresh fruits and vegetables. You go to more, canned foods, more higher calorie stuff that's not going to go old as fast because you can only go to the grocery store once a month.
Can
Um,
you imagine, like, can you imagine if it took you an hour? So if it takes you an hour and a half to get to your nearest grocery store, that's 3 hours round trip just driving. You actually have to do the grocery shopping.
yeah,
I mean, I know my way around the grocery store because of the internship, and I fortunately I love to cook. The grocery store is like my place. I thrive there. Um, but for somebody, who may not have the education or the the privilege of familiarity with the grocery store, that might be an hour long to 2 hour long grocery haul, especially if you know like you said, they might only be going once a month. If that's going to be a 4 to 5 hour trip, that's wild to think
yeah,
about. And it's the reason why I'm using that hour and a half mark. I think people are probably going to hear this and be like, there is nowhere in the United States where it takes somebody an hour and a half to get to the store. Well, I was in my various graduate assistant endeavors, I was involved in research once in one of the clinics in Athens, and we would have patients come from West Virginia, and they would drive an hour and a half. Sometimes they would tell me in our interviews, in our sessions together, because this was the nearest doctor that they could get to. So they had to take off work, they had to find childcare, and that, those are other expenses. So now you're losing money because you're not working. You're losing money because you have to pay somebody to watch your children. And if you're going to come up all of this way and it happens to be around your nearest grocery store also, you might now be taking the time to do your grocery shopping also. That's an 8 hour day just to go to the supermarket and the doctor. I can walk down the street and there's 3 doctors. It's
and
there's such, oh God, there's so many things.
it's crazy too because like we haven't even gotten to the point of healthier foods just in general costing more either. Like these are all just things that like are related to finances, but not even the individual cost of the food. And sure, there are healthier options that are pretty cheap, like I don't know, like oatmeal, like oats. Those are super cheap. I know some places you can find like chicken breasts that are pretty cheap, like $1.99 a pound. That's not bad, depending on where you live. But for the most part, like it does, at least per calorie, it is usually more expensive if you're going to buy healthier food options.
Oh
Um,
yeah, for sure.
so that's just like another variable in there too. Once you can finally afford to take those multiple trips to buy fresh food, pay for the gas, especially if you live very far away from a grocery store, then you have to worry about the cost of the actual food and then having enough of it to feed your entire family if you have, multiple people living in the same household.
And usually, if we're going to bring, education into this, which I think we should, usually those individuals with lower education and lower literacy levels, they typically do tend to have larger families, um, which is going to increase how much money you need to spend on food. God forbid it's a family full of boys. I bet you eat 2 to 3 times as much as I do. It costs you significantly more money to feed yourself than it would cost me if we were, buying the same items, in amounts that would nourish us, just because you need double or triple than I do. So that's something else to think about too. It's probably cheaper to have um, younger kids, um, female kids. It just I can't like wrap my head around all of the variables that go into this. And it really just, that's, when people talk about obesity, it's hard for me. I almost don't want to put my input in there a lot of the time, because there's so much to say. And when everybody thinks it's, oh, this person's lazy, and oh, that, it's their medication, it's their genetics, I'm like, I don't have time to sit here and actually like discuss this more with you. It's a lot.
Yeah, well, next time somebody mentions it, you can just direct them to this podcast and they can listen to
Yeah, yeah, true.
it. But and another thing too is like a lot of people probably listening to this, like they probably can't afford a gym membership, at least Planet Fitness, $10 a month. Um, but some people can't. Some people really can't afford those extra expenses. And if they don't have access to a gym, like sure they can go outside, but I mean, what if they live, in a very cold city in the winter? You want them to go out for like a 2 mile run in the city, especially in places where maybe there aren't any sidewalks, and you just want them to run on the street. Like, yeah, it's possible, but I think like these things we're bringing up, they're not excuses, but I think it's important to just acknowledge and realize that some people, as far as maintaining a healthier body weight, they have so many different variables that you might not even like think of as issues for yourself, um,
Mm.
just based off of geographic location where they live or income. And this could be like a topic for another day, but income, it's not, a lot of times it is based off of, the individual person's choices that they make throughout their life. But, you are influenced by what your parents did, what their parents did, and then what their parents did, as far as income goes. So some of these income situations that people get in, it's not necessarily their fault. They definitely can put in work to get out of it, but sometimes it is just a little tougher.
Yeah. And the same thing, that social influence goes, hand in hand with how you eat, what your dietary patterns are like. And you asked me about how I got into nutrition. Something that was really helpful for me at the time was that my dad was looking to improve his nutrition. He was looking to improve his weight. So it wasn't just, your wacko 17-year-old daughter, like obsessed with whatever, eating healthy and fruits and vegetables and lean meats and being skinny. It was a health journey for him as much as it was an educational journey for me. And having somebody who, I mean, he's, now that I'm older and a little better versed in nutrition, he's definitely maybe not the person to go to for nutrition advice, but at the time, he was influencing me and guiding me into what are better or more optimal choices. And he was helping me decide, okay, what if we swap this for this? I heard that whole wheat is better for us, and it's better for my diabetes. What do we think? So having me as his support system and him as kind of mine helped my family make those changes a little bit easier. Not everybody has that.
Mm-hmm.
uh, not everybody is even really like capable of recognizing the way that their families have influenced their lifestyle habits. It takes a little bit of reflection to be able to sit there and say, okay, this is not the way that I've grew up doing things. But I really do, I should focus on changing them. But then it comes down to like almost that educational piece, because I feel like when I was in school, I don't know about you, but you got to a certain age where school changed from learning about kind of like the functions of things to learning to think critically. I just remember all of my teachers saying, we're trying to teach you to think critically and to use your mind, to use your brain, and to not just go from A to B, but figure out how to like whatever circle around it.
Yeah.
And for some people who weren't really that educated, maybe never got to that place, they have trouble with the critical thinking. And kind of like, all right, like I was telling you before, the podcast started, I haven't had gas in 4 days. I haven't been able to cook for 4 days. So what did I do? I started making scrambled eggs in the microwave. I've been trying to use my critical thinking skills to adapt to my new, frankly, annoying situation. But most people might not think that way. It would be very easy for someone to just assume, okay, well, shit, now I have to go to the grocery store. Yeah, or maybe they don't even have a microwave. I'm going off on a tangent, but like, that's just like an example of, again, how, all of that stuff can kind of come into each other.
Yeah, yeah. I think a really good point you made was just the influence that your family has on your food choices, and like especially growing up when you're a little kid. Like, I mean, you don't cook for yourself when you're a 5-year-old. Like,
Oh,
you what was that?
I said you have no control.
Yeah, you have no control. You don't go to the grocery store. You don't buy your own groceries. You don't cook for yourself. You don't even usually give suggestions. At least a 5-year-old, I don't think would give suggestions to your parents like,
Like that.
hey, hey, can you make me broccoli with this? Like you don't have control over those things, and like you grow up eating a certain way, and I think there are a lot of people who, they were lucky to grow up in households where their families did eat, fruits and vegetables every single day. They did eat lean meats. They did cook balanced meals pretty much every single day. But then you have people who grew up in households where they didn't do that, where they were eating microwaved meals almost every night, or they were getting fast food multiple times a week. And those habits, like you build those when you're growing up, and then it's really, really hard to break those habits when you get older, um,
Mhm.
especially even when you're like an adolescent and you're a teenager. You're still living in their household. And then when you go on and move away, if you do, whenever, if you're 18, maybe you go to college, then that's like the first chance you get to really be uninfluenced by your parents, at least in your food choices. Um,
Yeah.
but
And
even then,
that you like kind of consciously choose to.
yeah,
It's so easy to just look in your pantry. Okay, like I'm used to this brand of pasta. I'm used to my dad's homemade sauce, but he's not going to make me sauce because I don't live with him, so like I'll just grab this one and then this cheese, and then we always have chips in the house. Like you don't really know how to grocery shop. You just grab the stuff that you remember seeing in your pantry growing up, and then you realize after you start to cook and you start to feel like crap, maybe you don't get to that point, but that
yeah,
definitely happened to me when I was in college. um
yeah.
it
And
fall back on that.
there, there's even like a level of comfort too with eating what was normal for you to eat growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and stepping outside of that comfort zone it's
Sorry,
hard.
it in the background is so
I
funny.
know. Hold on, I'm gonna pause this really quick and let her out because I'm just gonna
She's
let her out of the room because I think she really wants to get out of here. Yeah, so changing your food choices, that is a huge step out of your comfort zone, especially um, when you kind of get into the education piece that you a little bit mentioned too, to where like you have to be educated on how to even cook some of these healthier foods. Um, like I know there are some foods that I had no idea like what the best way to cook to make them taste good was when I started eating them because I just never ate them growing up. My family never made them.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like silly, like if you're well versed in like cooking different vegetables and everything, and your family did, you probably think like, well, this is silly. But there are some people who grew up and they did not eat any of this stuff, and they don't even know like what these things are. Like you could say like quinoa to somebody, and they literally have no idea what it is.
My dad always tells us as in, me and my sister, that my mom didn't know what broccoli was before they met. She, grew up with in a family that was just kind of a meat and potatoes kind of family, and like maybe they would have canned green beans or something like that. And to this day, my mom is in her 60s. Um, she does not, really think to shop for vegetables or cook vegetables. It's usually my dad who's saying, "Oh, we're not having a vegetable tonight." it's just so kind of ingrained in her mind. It's not very natural to her necessarily. It's
Yeah.
not unfamiliar now, but it's not like a first thought by any means.
And I'll actually admit too, pretty sure the very first time I ever had a banana was in college.
Really?
A banana, yes. The very first time I ever had a banana was in college because I always thought just the texture was just really freaking weird and it was like mushy and like I didn't eat that many fruits growing up. Like I ate some, like I ate apples and clementines and oranges. Those were like kind of the big three that I ate growing up. But like I thought the texture just seemed really disgusting and I didn't want to try it. But I tried it in college and it was like it's one of my favorite fruits now.
Whole new world.
I know it's a whole new world. So like just those little things like there's so many foods that I never tried growing up and that are considered, healthy. And people just don't think about that. Like, and it's hard to figure out how to cook those things in a way that tastes good if you haven't been exposed to them.
Yeah, and every time I have learned this number, it has changed. So I don't quote me on it, anybody that's listening, but it takes you so any, more than 12 times, I'll just say. It was, 10 to 12, and then it was 12 to 15, and then all of a sudden it was 15 to 18. It depends on who you ask, but it takes more than 12 times for you to develop a preference for something, after trying it. So you have to try something more than 12 times to start to become familiar with the taste of this fruit or the taste of this vegetable. And that means cooking it different ways or trying it different ways. One of the rotations in my dietetic internship was with Live Healthy Appalachia, specifically Live Healthy Kids. And what they did, because it is, a more impoverished area, was that they went into second grade classrooms and they would prepare various plant-based, I was going to say vegan, it was vegan, there was no meat involved, but plant-based food. So we did different bean dips and different salsas and different pasta dishes. And I forget what the numbers are exactly, but the kids tried red pepper and green pepper and onion and garlic and carrots, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And they would do a pre and a post test at the beginning of the year. Obviously, that's the pre-test, and the post-test at the end of the year. Trying to see how the preference of these kids have changed and how the preference of their families have changed and what their buying habits were. And like every year, their preference for these fruits and vegetables would go up, and the families would report buying some of these fruits and vegetables more frequently because they were exposed to it. And in that case too, a big thing down in Athens, and I'm sure a big thing kind of for any family, is that they didn't lose money trying to get their kids to like these foods. If you feed a kid a green pepper and you sauteed it in salt and pepper and some olive oil, they might not like it. And then what, you're going to throw it all out, or you're going to eat it, or what? So in a cost effective way, all of these kids were able to try something that in the long run, as long as they keep consuming it, will improve their health, and their family didn't have to worry about it. And it was great.
Yeah,
But not
no,
everyone has like a program like that.
yeah, that's awesome. So like if you have access to programs like that, you definitely need to take advantage of those.
Mhm.
But yeah, like we tend to like conform to whatever like different people like their behaviors that we're exposed to. So and even if you're like a parent and you're trying to eat healthy but your kid just won't eat healthy foods, like just keep doing what you're doing and eventually they'll probably start to choose those foods that you're choosing because they see you doing it and they see you're happy with it. And that repeated exposure is just key to really getting someone to buy into those behaviors.
Yeah, so important. And you see it in like very very different ways than maybe you'd expect to see it. Like when Johnny goes to his friend's house and maybe he doesn't get soda at home, but maybe they're getting soda at their friend's house. I babysat for years and years and years, and the kids would have play dates, and they'd look at me and they'd be like, I can have a soda, I can have a Pepsi. Are you sure I'm not really like supposed to have Pepsi? I don't have it at my house. Or there was one time I would make them food sometimes, and we did like a chicken and broccoli and pasta dish, like pretty easy. The parents were definitely very well off, and they were always trying to serve their kids vegetables, so that was kind of their one request. They were like, oh, you like nutrition, like please just get some kind of vegetable into their meal however you can. And I remember this little boy that was over for the play date looked at me. He's like, broccoli, like my mom makes broccoli all the time, but not like this. And like he ended up really liking it. It's just, it's not always okay, I'm giving my son what I want him to eat and he's going to eat it. Like it translates differently, especially when they're that young,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
said, that exposure is so important.
Yeah. And another thing too is that like we all know how hard it is to um, lose weight and then keep the weight off. And
Mm-hmm.
once you like if you grow up with poor eating habits or you're eating, very calorie dense foods that and you end up, overweight as a kid growing up, and then by the time you hit 18 or so, you might be at the higher obesity ranges. Like it is a lot harder to lose that weight and then maintain, a healthier body weight than it is to just grow up kind of maintaining that healthier body weight. So like a lot of these people who now like are kind of adding to this adult obesity prevalence, they probably grew up as like obese children throughout the years. Um, and there are actual like physiological changes that occur when you have obesity and then you lose weight, that we can see that are different compared to someone who might be the same exact size, same exact activity level, but they hadn't gained a bunch of weight and lost it. They just maintained. Like there was a study done on Biggest Loser participants. I think this was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago or so. Don't quote me on that, but there was a study done on them, and like they calculated basically how many calories they should be able to eat and maintain their weight based off of their body weight and activity level and everything. But it was a little bit lower, and a lot of that was due to some metabolic adaptation that occurred from having to lose so much weight. So like if there was somebody who was 5 foot and 100 pounds and they've always been 5 foot and 100 pounds the whole entire life, they might be able to maintain their weight on like 14, 15, 1600. Let's just go with 1600 calories. But somebody who had maybe gained up to maybe like 250 in their 5 foot, and they lose 150 pounds down to 100, they might only be able to maintain their weight on maybe 1200, so like 400 calories less, because of that weight loss that they had. And their body is basically telling them like, okay, like we were used to all this food before and now you took it away, now we feel like we needed more to get it back.
Yeah. And not only the food, but I'm used to so much. I was used to so much weight before, and now it's not there. So there are going to be those adaptations or adaptions, or however anyone says it. Um, I
Yeah,
lost.
and even like different changes in like ghrelin and leptin levels. Like ghrelin, the hormone that makes you hungry, and leptin's basically the hormone that makes you feel full. So like people who after they've lost a lot of weight, at least initially when they just finish losing the weight, they have higher levels of ghrelin, basically increasing their hunger to try to get them back to that baseline weight that they were at. So it's like even if you gain a bunch of weight and you are extremely obese and then you end up losing it, like you're not done with the battle once you lose that weight. You're still kind of constantly fighting those physiological changes to try to maintain that healthier weight. And I don't think a lot of people think about that, especially when they go to start like blaming someone, saying that they're lazy. Like you could go day to day just kind of eating based off of your hunger cues at a normal body weight and you have no problem. But somebody who used to be obese and now they're at a normal body weight, every single day it might be like a struggle for them to just stay full so they don't end up overeating.
Yeah, I used to see stuff like that all the time when I was working at Jenny Craig. When I said I was a weight loss counselor, I was a weight loss counselor at Jenny Craig. for anybody that doesn't know that. But people, I just thought they were going to come in and they were going to do, and this goes for any kind of weight loss program, not just Jenny Craig, but they think, and it's the same reason that people ask us for meal plans. They think that they're just going to follow this plan and lose this weight, and then that's it. That's done. And that's like kind of the easiest part. The hardest part is really understanding those changes in order for you to maintain that weight. Because, like we were talking about before with the grocery shopping, it's so easy to fall back on old habits. So that's really where we want to make those changes. It's the habitual changes. It's not the number on the scale or the way that you look. I mean, none of that matters if you didn't learn anything, through the whole process. It has to be more than just weight. Not that there's anything wrong with wanting to change your body composition, but I think people they don't quite understand that specifically aiming to lose weight that's the part of dieting that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can drastically cut out a bunch of food, cut out a bunch of calories and lose weight, but you have to have different things in place, like behaviors, to basically make you feel full, and basic lifestyle changes to make you be more active so you can maintain that weight loss. You have to include more fiber, more protein in your diet, maybe drink more water, things like that to, like I said, make you feel more full so you can maintain kind of your eating habits that you're having after you get done losing the weight.
Yeah.
So another thing that could definitely have an effect on you gaining weight and the obesity is your work environment. So what are kind of like one or two things that you think that the work environment can really play into as far as obesity?
There's probably a few things. I think that one of the biggest ones is the night shift workers. I think that's very hard for people. I think also maybe going a different route. I feel that your question was a little vague now that I'm trying to think of the best way to respond.
Let's talk about night shift workers. So night shift workers, like what about being a night shift worker would lead someone to maybe overeat or in that regard?
I think that's like a kind of situational, because if you are single and living life and you are free to do whatever you want whenever you want, it is I'm use this word cautiously, easy to just sleep during the day and then stay awake at night. That's not obviously easy, but in theory it is, as opposed to maybe a mother of two or a father of two who needs to make sure that their kids are fed, their kids get to school, their kids get to aftercare, and then they have dinner, they go to bed, and then maybe now they need to do their night shift work. They're going to require in a lot of ways, for a lot of reasons, more energy and a different type of energy. And even if let's say that they don't necessarily need more energy, or sorry, my phone went off, or maybe like it's their habits. They're going to be eating whenever they get a chance. So they can almost more easily fall into this like restricting and binging habit that we see a lot of chronic dieters do, based on the type of job that they're doing. We think of night shift workers, or at least I think of night shift workers as like nurses, doctors. Those are kind of primarily the ones that I think of or come to mind first. And if you're running around the hospital floor for hours, you can't just like grab a yogurt and go. Your patient is going into cardiac arrest or is having an issue. So by the time you get off or the time you get to lunch, it's so easy to just over consume the way that we see, again, people do when they chronically diet.
Yeah, no, 100%. I like what you said about how you talked about like during their shift, they're probably so busy and don't have any time to eat. And then they finally get off and maybe it's like 7 or 8 a.m. and
Mhm.
they're starving. They just want to eat something. They don't want to spend time to go home and spend, 30 minutes or so to cook something. They want something right now. So they swing through McDonald's, get some McDonald's breakfast or something, and then hopefully maybe they go to bed, if they're tired, but they're getting those super calorie dense, high calorie meals instead of going home and cooking something that might be a little less calorie dense and have more fruits and vegetables with it or things like that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think lack of sleep is a huge issue too with that population, with people working night shift. Um, Lack of sleep, there's been a few studies where people who are sleep deprived or restricted sleep, they just tend to eat more calories. They tend to overeat by maybe up to like 300 or 400 calories worth. Um,
More. I
yeah,
think a lot of that too is psychological because you are, at least I would imagine it being a night shift worker. And there are different kinds. You have your EMTs, your firefighters, your police officers. Those are very sporadic. Um, for the most part, obviously, if you're, a police officer, you're usually scheduled for a shift. But like a firefighter, an EMT, you could be called in at any moment, and that will affect whether or not you are able to eat or when you can eat or whatever. But when you have somebody like your nurses and your doctors and anybody else who is scheduled and can foresee, like knows how long their shift is, they you might just think, and because I've done this before, when you're pulling an all-nighter in college or you're trying to study or you're just really tired and you want energy, you think, okay, I need to eat, and you might not even be hungry. You just assume that, like, okay, if I put calories in, like, my body will do its magic and like I'll wake up. And that doesn't always happen, but I think a lot of those people probably do function that way and kind of just hope for the best, and that will provide them with a lot of like empty calories, if they're already meeting their needs. And that's kind of their way to battle any of their physical challenges. And that's, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there are even changes in like ghrelin levels too, with like restricted sleep too. Like if you have restricted sleep, your ghrelin levels increase, and then you end up being hungrier than you usually would be, and then you end up over consuming food. And then especially if, like you said, if you have a family at home, if you have kids to take care of, like you're not going to get like any sleep during the day. You're going to work all night, come home. I mean, it's daylight too, so it's even harder to fall asleep when it's light outside. And then you have kids running around, and maybe you don't have anyone else there to take care of the kids, so you have to be awake to take care of the kids too most of the time. And it's just, I don't know, it's a terrible thing. Like I've seen people working night shifts, and it is rough. I applaud you for it, but I wish you wouldn't have to do it, because like there are a lot of negative health consequences of poor sleep and sporadic sleep.
There are, and I don't remember exactly what they are, but when I went to Fancy, I got to see a really, really interesting presentation on sleep and the importance of rest. And there are physiological changes that occur in people who are trying to flip their sleep schedules. There are Our bodies literally react to us trying to fall asleep in the middle of the day versus the middle of the night. If you guys are regular nappers, I don't know, you probably know that you are more sensitive to your environment if you're sleeping in the middle of the day. So even if you do fall asleep throughout the whole day, it's not that kind of that deep sleep that you're getting when you're falling asleep at night, because of these changes that are occurring. Just because that's not normally when you go to bed. That's not how we're really like set up. It's
Mm-hmm.
we're not built to just sleep for 8 hours whenever. We're supposed to sleep as it gets dark.
Yeah.
um,
Have you heard of the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker?
no, I haven't.
Oh, you're gonna have to read that. I'm almost done with it. I took a little break from it because I got really busy, but he's basically like a sleep scientist, and he talks about all of the negative effects of, not having enough sleep, sleeping when it's not dark outside, not getting enough deep sleep, REM sleep. There's so many different negative health consequences of it. Like
Crazy
it,
topic.
it's crazy. Like cancer, Alzheimer's, obesity, diabetes, blood glucose control, just like everything. So it's super interesting, and definitely recommend checking out that book. Also, if you don't want to spend time to read the book, I believe he was on Joe Rogan's podcast once. So I'm sure if you type that in, like Matthew Walker, Joe Rogan, that would pop up. And the episode is probably like 2 to 3 hours long, but it was super interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. People undervalue sleep so much.
Mm-hmm.
And people will make fun of. I go to bed like pretty early nowadays. I kind of seem like an little old lady because I'll be in bed by like 9:30. But I really value my sleep. I want 7 to 8 hours every night because I function so much better and I feel so much more rested and I feel so much more recovered. If I, have a big lift at the gym and I get a shitty night's sleep, I can feel it the next day. I don't know if you can, but maybe I'm just like a little more in tune with myself, but it makes a world of difference, and people are just like, oh, it's whatever, I'll like sleep with that when I'm dead. That's no.
No, that's
No.
not a good mentality to have, for sure. But I feel like we covered a lot of it. I think probably the last thing is just like all of these things that we talked about, especially I would say the financial and the lack of sleep and the environment is like stressful living conditions in general. Like the more stressed you are, the more likely you're probably going to choose more calorie dense foods that are going to be higher in calorie, and that could just lead to overconsumption easier.
Yeah, I I agree. I definitely fall into that. um just when I get stressed, especially like in grad school. Not that, nutrition wasn't a priority because it always is. Um, but it was so easy to be like, oh my God, I don't have time. I need to study for this, or I need to prepare for my defense or this meeting or this whatever. It was just so easy to like grab something from the atrium or grab something, excuse me, off Court Street, or, something that I could have in my hands at that moment. So just being
Mm-hmm.
prepared for things like that is probably the best that anybody can do to try and combat that. So when we talk about, just stressful situations, it really comes to, it encompasses or embodies all of those topics: the lack of time, the kind of like a lack of motivation, the lack of energy, and it just purely becomes about ease. So if you can set yourself up in the easiest way to meet your goals ahead of time, I mean, you obviously can't always anticipate like a stressful situation, but if you know that they are frequent, then maybe put some
Yeah.
things together that like suit you and your needs.
Yeah, for sure. Whenever we are, whether whether we're stressed because of like a lack of time, lack of finances, or anything, we're always going to go to whatever is the most convenient for us at the time. And the most convenient foods to eat are usually the ones that are just highly processed, prepackaged, that tend to be higher in calories, and they taste really freaking good. So it's so easy to overconsume them too. So yeah, so I don't want to take too much more of your time because I know it's been like about an hour so far, but I just wanted to say this again to where like all of these things we talked about, they're not meant to say that obesity is this problem that there's no way we're going to be able to solve or anything, or to kind of feel like hopeless because they have so many variables backing them up. But I think there are things to just think about because for a lot of people, if we can't brainstorm on ways to kind of fix these variables, or at least help to get rid of them or eliminate them a little bit, then it's just going to make the whole situation a lot harder to fix, I guess.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think what we did what we always do. We bounce around and we talk a little bit about everything. And like I, probably said a million times during this podcast, there's just like you just said, we've been on here for a little over an hour and we didn't even hit on nearly everything, or at least, not in a great, amount of detail. There's just so much that plays into this, and it's not just people being lazy or being poor or not having access, and it's not people just not caring. So I think for people listening too, you kind of need to consider that before maybe you judge someone that you see that is a little bit bigger,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a lot bigger. It's none of my business. It's really none of their business either. That it's so much more than not having time or eating too much. So just to think about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, tell the audience where they can find you, if anywhere on social media. Yeah.
So I have a professional Instagram that I haven't really used, but you are all free to contact me on that if you want. It is for Fork's Sake RD. I'll have Joey maybe tag me in the comments so it's a little bit easier to find. And my personal page is tagged on that site as well if you wanted to follow me on that. I am working on starting to get my professional page up and moving now that I have time and I'm done with school and things like that. But that's probably the best place to find me is Instagram.
Cool, cool. Yeah, that's why I was like, I wanted to bring that Instagram page up, but I wasn't sure if I should because I don't know, you haven't started posting on it yet, so I didn't know if you wanted to reveal it yet. So that's why I was kind of like, let you just say what you want to say. But
I do. I probably will once I get my oven back and get things a little more organized. Like I said, I just moved. Um, I probably will post some budget friendly meals and macro friendly meals and just really easy cooking. I think that is something um, that some people just really struggle with.
mhm,
So it's something that I really enjoy doing it. And I, have been a poor student for the very large majority of my life. So I've kind of gotten a lot of it down. So that, will be my focus probably. But give me a follow if you want.
well, thank you so much for coming on, Allie. I'm super excited to have you on. Definitely probably going to ask you to come on in the future again. So, uh,
Hopefully I'll be a dietitian by then.
oh, I'm sure you will. So, yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.